Hey everybody, welcome to Spirit and Truth. This is Lee Cummings. I am your host today, and with me is my good friend, Jon Tyson, the pastor of Church of the City in New York, literally Manhattan, the Big Apple. And he is one of my favorite thinkers, authors, preachers, and just all around friend in the ministry. And Jon, thanks so much for being with me today. It's an honor to have you here.
Mate, what a joy to catch up. Looking forward to talking.
I know. We always have some great conversations, and I wanted to have you on to talk about really one theme, but come at it from a couple of different angles, things that are, I look at it and are right in your sweet spot, things that over the years we have a kindred spirit, a kindred interest in, and that's revivals and awakenings. And I would love for you to talk about, and we'll come back. I want to talk about Hebrides, I want to talk about Asbury, and I want to talk about the future. So those three things. But first, what I'd really like you to do is to just talk about, to the people that are listening, how you got interested in awakenings and revivals. Because I think there's people that follow you and follow you for a lot of different reasons. Some follow you because of your book on men. Some follow you because of your background with Tim Keller and church planting in New York. Some follow you because of revival and because of prayer, the focus on prayer. You have the Awakening Network that you're helping churches learn how to be praying churches. But I would love for you to just talk a little bit about your history of how your heart got captivated by this contending for revival and revival history.
Well, yeah, I mean, backstories are always important. My backstory, really, I am the fruit of a youth group in Adelaide, South Australia, that back in the day was called Solid Rock. I was not a Christian when I started going there, not really interested in things of the Lord. And went to this youth group, and I was just kind of shaken by what was happening in it. This was a place you went, and God was there. I've said many times, quite often, the last thing people expect when they go to church is to meet God. They expect good worship, good teaching, friendly people, good facilities. But if God was there, they wouldn't know what to do. At this youth group, God was there. And it just absolutely transformed me. It was a revivalist culture of a youth group. I remember one night that really, really marked me. My youth pastor, this is a guy named Paul Geerling, who's a pastor in Australia. He did like a mashup of revivals around the world on VHS, where he had this one tape of all these moves of God put together. And then he played them and then said, this is how God wants to use us. And we just spent the night crying out to God. And I remember just being in an atmosphere where my level of faith and the possibility of who God is and what he does, it was in the air. It was the atmosphere I was a part of. And I remember going on youth camps where I'd stay up all night. I remember one youth camp staying up all night and reading the book of Jeremiah out loud as a prophetic act to our youth group. You know, like we're not too young to be used by God. So I just had this in me. And then I read a book called Why Revival Tarries by Leonard Ravenhill. And it was the first or second book I read as a new believer. And it's very hard to articulate, but something came over me. I was just seized with the vision for revival. Yeah. So I started getting up at 4:00 in the morning and then going to my city, which was Adelaide, driving my motorbike in. And when I'm 17, and then getting on my knees and taking communion every morning, like Smith Wigglesworth used to, praying for a move of God in my city. And to be honest with you, I'm 47. 30 years later, I am still just keeping the culture of that youth group alive in my heart. I got a deposit. Paul says, guard the deposit. I know in that passage he's talking about sort of the gospel, but I got a deposit of the gospel, and I've tried to keep that flame alive. So yeah, over the years, I've had different other things that sort of come in and have complemented that. But the deepest burning in my spirit is that I am an old school revivalist. So yeah, I just sort of kept it alive since then.
Yeah, and you're contending for it in New York, of all places. But it really seems, I was just there a couple of years ago with you, and it seems what God is doing in your church and what God is doing in New York is you can feel the underpinnings and you can feel the rumble under the surface of something about ready to snap, something about ready to break.
Man, we have been having these visitations. And again, I'm different than a lot of guys because I think having really studied revival and understanding the crushing, the spiritual warfare, the controversy, the cost, the spiritual violence, I don't want to hype this up. I want to sort of guard it. So yeah, we've had these prayer meetings. They start for an hour and they last 3.5 days. We regularly have folks praying all night. These are not paid ministers. These are people who work at the New York Times and Amazon, and these are business people with a vision for God to move. So yeah, there's actually something. It's like a quiet miracle in Manhattan, is what we call it.
Yeah.
There's just such a strong sense of the presence of God. But one day, if God really does something potent, we'll lift the lid off for the world to see. But we try and just sort of guard it so it doesn't get blown up before it's time. So yeah, but there's a profound sense God is at work in our church. I'm grateful for it.
It's interesting when you look at revival history and study it as you have, I have. When you look at these historic revivals or awakenings, whatever you want to call them, whether it's Wales, the Welsh revival, or it's Azusa Street in Los Angeles at the turn of the 20th century, or Hebrides, which for those who are listening who've never heard that term, that's up in it's in Scotland, or the very, very north, and some of the most obscure places in the world. It's always interesting to me how God picks these places. And you can find it in the Bible. God chooses Bethlehem instead of Jerusalem to bring about a move. Jesus, the ultimate move of God. But God is sneaky in how he chooses and selects locations. And one of the places that has become a highlight for you, I think, is interconnected with both relationally, historically, and I think even some patterns there that you're really drawn to is the revival of the Hebrides. Maybe just kind of give everybody just the Cliff Notes version of what the Hebrides revival is and why it's so significant to you.
Well, the Hebrides Revival, it's you can't really talk about one of them. It's one of those places on earth that seems to have had a whole series of histories of moves of God. I don't know if it's because of, sort of the Celtic nature, the idea of thin places. I don't know. It's because of the price that Protestants have paid in Scotland to sort of hold their faith. But the Hebrides is a place that has seen move after move after move of God. They had one in the late 1930s, before the one that we're going to talk about, that was really a prayer revival. And so yeah, it's a place. It's obscure. It's very hard to get to. It feels like you're on the end of the earth. But it's just one of those places that God has visited time and time again, not without controversy. The one that we're probably referring to, which was the revival that Duncan Campbell was a sort of a key preaching figure in, happened, between 1949 and 1952, really, in a series of sort of waves of the Spirit of God coming. And what I love about it, is, he talks about a kind of God consciousness. Revival is a community conscious of God. It's a God awareness. And, they just have stories of, I think, what I'm after in New York. They had one move of God in a particular part of the island where there was not a home in 5 miles that didn't have somebody to come to Christ in it, almost like a nuclear fallout region where someone came to Christ in each of it. Very strong preaching, not watered down preaching. A lot of times when people talk about revival, they're basically talking about Pentecostal manifestations.
Right.
So a revival is gold dust, physical manifestations. I'm not opposed to those things. I'm a charismatic. I'm all for the gifts, the manifestation gifts today. But we should not confuse normal charismatic life for awakening and revival. And what they experienced in the Hebrides was awakening and revival. Tangible zones of the manifest presence of God where you would walk into it and come under conviction. They actually talked about catching revival. And some of the young people would try and stay away because they didn't want to get saved because they were worried they would catch the revival. So yes, stories of preaching and stories of visitations of the power of God coming down, an incredible culture of prayer. Why I'm so drawn to it? I read the book, read Duncan Campbell's stuff on it, and I just,
Right.
I mean, just sat there weeping. Some part of my heart resonated at a primal level. So I took my family on a revival tour in 2018. Some people go to Disney with their family. We went on a 17 location, 33-day tour around the
This is
world.
why I love Jon
Yes.
Tyson.
Yeah, where the greatest outpourings in history have happened. And when we got to the Hebrides, several things happened there. Number one, I got to pray with the last remaining folks who were alive from that revival. So they laid hands on me, and that was an extraordinary time. One of the defining moments of my life until this past summer, when I got something better than that. It was the culture of prayer. It was their passion for the things of God. But there were so many patterns I learned about covenant prayer, contending in prayer, who God uses in prayer, the role between, what I just have come to call, the voice and the source, SOURCE. Intercessors are rarely great preachers, and great preachers rarely have the kind of intercession that true intercessors do. It's a partnership between the two. But probably one of my biggest revelations are standing at the front of the church of Barthas, which was in some senses the headquarters, was there's nothing there. It's the middle of nowhere. Wonderful people, but the middle of nowhere. And I just sort of was asking this question, why here and not Glasgow? We'd just been in Glasgow and Edinburgh. We loved it, major cities. And they've had moves of God too. But why here? And I just had this sort of thing rise in my heart, which is like, God came here because they wanted him here.
Right.
And it was the principle of hunger. God comes where he's wanted. And often these obscure places are places of desperation. And that in many ways is what attracts God. And so, I've done a lot. Our church put an album out. I've preached on it. I did a 7-month series called God Comes Where He's Wanted. And it was all on that principle of hunger. So yeah, that was a big part of why I love the Hebrides. I just want to say something to stir people's faith. I went to the Hebrides. I didn't know a soul, man. I went with the book Revival in the Hebrides by Duncan Campbell and Google Maps. And we rented a car and I just drove around looking at these places, standing with my family and asking God to do this in our midst. And then as it turns out, this is only, the Bible says God rewards those who diligently seek him. And the reward is more of him and more of what you're after in him. And as it turns out, I end up meeting the man who pastored the very church where the revival happened, who now pastors a church in Stornoway. You met him too. You stayed at my place.
Yeah.
Tommy and Donna McNeil have become wonderful friends. And then this past summer, they had the Hebrides Revival Conference, and I had the honor of my life of being able to preach in the Hebrides. And so that was God saying, you've honored what I've done in the past. You've sought me. I'm going to reward you with access to my heart for what I want to do in this region. And I'll say this, at the Hebrides Revival Conference this past summer, we had a moment where the presence of God came down with such force. I've never encountered anything quite like it. And I can only describe it as a kind of dread, but not fear, but kind of like holy terror. And it was after Donna, one of the pastors there, who had prayed, and she prayed this covenant prayer asking God to move. And we sort of messed the moment up because we didn't know how to hold the presence of God like that.
Right.
And it's only like in Revelation 8, it says, and think about this, it says there was silence in heaven for half an hour. All of heaven, the angels crying out, the multitudes, and for half an hour there was silence. And I didn't know this, but in the 1939 revival, they called it the silent revival because the awe of God would come down. People would not be able to talk in the presence of God. And that's what really happened. We were overwhelmed. And so we did what we needed to do, which was sing. And that was the wrong call. We should have just sat there. So it was such a powerful time. Tommy said to me, I think we've got unfinished business in the Hebrides. You need to come back next year. So I'm like so excited. Next year I'm going back and we're going to go and see if we can hold what we encountered, which is, the awe of God. So I love the Hebrides.
Man, that's incredible. I'm jealous. Maybe I'll come with you next year.
Come on over, mate. Come on over.
When what I have discovered is two things really spark a hunger and desperation for revival. One is when you experience something like you've experienced, you go someplace and you taste and you see the goodness of God, and He comes in a way that you've not ever experienced before, and you don't know how to respond. It reminds me of Peter when Jesus is transfigured on the top of the mountain, and here's Moses and Elijah. He doesn't know what to do. He's like, Lord, you want me to build 3 tents? And God had to interrupt him and say, "This is my son. Shut up and listen to him." We don't know what to do when
it's
God
a bit
comes.
like that.
But the other part is reading or listening or being exposed to what God has done in the past. I have a lot of young people who ask me, "What do you think the key is to revival?" I think, and my answer is always twofold. It's number one, study what God has done in the past and pray that He'll do it in your present and future. Prayer and faith growing in your heart because what He has done in the past. And Hebrides is one of those revivals. A couple of years ago in February, I know it was February because Jane and I were on vacation in Cancun. I was sitting by the pool reading a book called The Asbury Outpouring of 1970.
Wow.
I'm reading it.
Wow.
And my phone starts blowing up, and it's my friends saying, "Do you see what is happening at Asbury?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm reading. How do you know I'm reading about Asbury?" They said, "No, it's happening right now." And which was so ironic. And I had such a bad case of missing out because I was there for 10 days and I couldn't get back. I wanted to come back. But I know that you went there, you experienced Asbury. I've gotten to know Zach a little bit and some of the people that were a part of that. Talk about that, because I think in many ways Asbury is kind of a sign and a wonder, an indicator, a leading kingdom indicator of what God is on the verge will do in our future if we respond in a certain kind of way. What do you think Asbury was saying to us, and what was your experience there?
Well, it was really extraordinary. I think one of the things about Asbury, you've always got to ask God, what are you doing here? What is your purpose in this? A lot of people are trying to project their pleas for historic revival onto Asbury. And I was lucky to have, had friends who were like, don't come with we could just come and sit in the room and experience what God's doing. Just ask Him, show me what you're doing.
Right.
And so my heart was really prepared. And it was just God having mercy on Gen Z. It was the Father's love. That's what they called it, an outpouring, not a revival. Gen Z had just been beaten to death. I mean, I got 2 kids in Gen Z. The anxiety from COVID, we never really processed that as a society. We just put kids on medication and gave them time off school. We didn't really process that as a society. So these are kids who's, they've dealt with porn, anxiety, the families have fallen apart, nations in fragments. They're just the most anxious generation in history. And I think and then they've just come from scandal after scandal. Every pastor in every tradition, doesn't matter if it's Pentecostal, celebrity pastor, Anabaptist, every denomination had a major pastoral failing. And you got a lot of kids who would have you remember Bill Hybels back in the day, someone else who fell, but it was the local church is the hope of the world. I think people sort of no, it's not. It's filled with hypocrites and bad leaders.
Right.
And I think Jesus just sort of stepped in and said, I'll take it from here. And it was just it was just God showing what He can do in a moment, what we can't do in a lifetime. It was just as an outpouring of the love of God.
You mentioned in Hebrides, at least the last time you were there was a weight, almost a fear of the Lord that came upon it. Was that what you experienced at Asbury, or was that different?
No, it was not. It was not. It was like waves of liquid love. It was more like Finney's baptism. It was waves of liquid love. I mean, when you sort of settled into it, maybe it took half an hour to settle in. You just weep the whole time. Just perpetual weeping, involuntary weeping. And you could feel there was sort of like surges from the stage when certain things happened, where you would just feel a power come from the stage and almost move through your body. If you've ever been surfing and you're out, even if you've just ever been in the beach, when you're in the ocean, you can feel that wave come. You know what I mean? It's just like, whoa, it was like that, but the love of God, the liquid love of God You just feel it. There would be times it would be so intense, and then it would lift a bit, and then something would happen. There'd be another wave of it. So it was. I think it was God being merciful. It definitely showed me how desperate people are for God to move, because I've been back. I was at Asbury again this summer with a sort of like a little discussion group, sort of asking, what do we learn and what do we see God doing? The thing that was so remarkable to me is that when you're there and the revival's not on, there is nothing in Wilmore, Kentucky, mate.
I was
It
just
is, yeah, it is like
there's a subway,
it's
there's a subway and a stoplight.
yeah, it's so tiny, and it's the thing when God shows up, man. People will come from we're desperate for God. So yeah, I think it was God winning a generation back to Himself, restoring the credibility of Jesus in a generation that was sort of losing heart in the church, deconstructing faith and all the rest of it. And I think it was a sign of what it is that God wants to do in the future. It just here's what it did. It reminded me I'm not crazy talking about revival and moves of God. I mean, I've taken a lot of criticism over the years, just do discipleship, just preach the Bible. And I do preach the Bible. We do discipleship, honestly, pretty well as a church. But it's just the gap. When you care about more than your local congregation, when you lift your eyes to the kingdom, when you lift your eyes to stewarding the kingdom in a generation and caring about discipling nations and the bigger purposes of God, doesn't matter how good your local church is doing, you're going to get caught up in the heart of God for a moment in history. And when you look at that, you have to care about revival and awakening because of how dark it is.
Yeah.
And God's got to step in or it's over. So to me, that was God just showing us, I can step in. You're not crazy. Believe for more. I can do it. You know, Jonathan Edwards called revival the acceleration of the normal work of God, which means you get a decade in a day. You know, you get a year's worth of converts in a night. And that's what Asbury was. It was like all the pastoral healing work we wish we could do for a generation in 16 days.
Yeah.
And my daughter who went was deeply, deeply impacted by Asbury. So I loved it.
Yeah, even though I wasn't there, obviously paying attention to it, what it did for me is it gave me hope that God can still do it. Not like you doubt that. Of course God can still do it. But sometimes I think we get wrapped up into, America's a post-Christian culture. We've moved beyond that. Revival's kind of a old-fashioned thing that some spiritual, simple-minded people experienced when they got really energized. And, humanity's now much more complicated and sophisticated, and we've moved beyond that. And when you see a moment like that, especially to see Gen Z grab a hold of or be grabbed a hold of by God and by His heart like that, even for just 16 days, even though it felt longer at some moments to watch it from the outside, and then all of a sudden it was just like a wave that rescinded. But it gave me hope. It was like, no, this can happen on a larger scale. This is in the heart of God for the West and even beyond that.
Yeah, I would say so. A lot of times people dismiss it, like these people are just psychologically primed for this. These are coercive environments. Listen, man, Asbury was like a bad Baptist chapel service with a nuclear bomb attached.
Right.
It was not a coercive environment, man. I mean, it was very peaceful, very dialed down. It was minimal. I mean, certainly from the leadership, man, they were not leading out of the flesh. Right. There was no soulish or emotional leadership. It was very emotional.
Yeah.
But that was really a spirit-led thing. And it was, again, I think it was one of those things where Jesus was saying, you can't dismiss this. This is not a concert. There's no lighting. This was just like the raw love of God, word of God, testimony, and prayer.
And no famous names, no celebrity preachers, no celebrity worship leaders. In fact, they really from what I understand, they really worked hard at playing that down and protecting that. And where do you think this is going, John? If you had to look on the horizons as a futurist, as a student of revival, as a man of prayer and contending for this, when we say revival, people have all kinds of different ideas of what revival looks like. You mentioned charismatic signs and wonders and manifestations, Jonathan Edwards' definition, the accelerated normal work of God. What do you think is on the horizons for us, and I'm talking specifically in the West, whether that's the United States, whether that's Western civilization, whether that's global, and if you have any type of feel of what that's going to look like.
Well,
we're not going to hold you to this, but
okay. Well, I'm not doing end time prophecy charts, so we should at least be good. A couple of things. Number one, what a glorious time to be alive, mate. I mean, it took me, I was just in Iceland, okay? I've never been to a country I feel more ripe for a move of God than Iceland. I've been there 4 times in 3 years. God willing, I'll go there every year the rest of my life. Just feels right. But it took me less time to fly to Iceland than it did to fly to California. My point is, what a time to be alive for the gospel. We can go anywhere from your phone. You can reach billions of people. This is a time to dream the dream of God for the moment. You are put here at a moment of history where it's never been easier to get the gospel out, tell what God's doing around the world, and stir one another on. So this is a time for big dreams. Okay? Like, that's why you've been put here in this moment. Don't put your head down and miss it.
Right.
Second thing I'd say, I believe there's going to be, I think we're going to see a whole series of cascading moves of God that create a window of repentance we haven't seen in our lifetime. Like, I fully anticipate the New York Times adding a desk that's talking about the revival in New York. God's doing something, mile-long line through Times Square to get into a building. I genuinely believe these things. Because we're actually in the greatest revival in church history right now. It's just not happening in the West. The question's not, is there going to be revival? There is revival right now in Iran, in the global South. It's staggering what God's doing. I will tell you the thing I'm really excited about is some of those things that we've heard only happen in the third world, the Muslim world, are now happening in the West. I just did an interview with a guy who's at Cambridge, Oxford, named Stephen Foster, leads St. Algate's Church. He said they're having people he told me the story about one young woman, not from a faith background, and in the dream, someone said to her, you must read the Gospel of Luke in the Christian Bible. And she didn't know she had a Bible in her house. What is the Bible? And she woke up and next to her bed was the Bible with the Gospel of Luke open to it. She ended up giving her life to Jesus. They had a whole series of people in their community all have dreams that said you should go to church. And they all showed up at church saying, I had a dream. Jesus told me to go to church. So we're starting to see those things that happen in other parts of the world happen here. I will say this, I think there's a growing realization the best of what we can do is not enough. It's really this kind of only comes out by prayer and fasting. We've tried celebrity pastors, content, technology. We've tried mega church, house church, simple church. We've tried discipleship. We've tried justice. We've tried everything, and all it's done is facilitate further decline. And I think the solution to that is God himself. And he has conditions around seeking him that unlock his power and his presence. You don't earn, you inherit. There's a difference. And I think he's just getting a bunch of people desperate. And the thing that you and I, this is sort of how we connected, God's building friends around revival. That's, to me, the most exciting thing. There is a network from all these different backgrounds of people who all care about this. And when you get a theme that clear, that is that God honoring, that is that centered on him, we're asking for things. I'm asking for things in New York that A, are not centered in any church, so no one even can sort of figure out where it happened. And then B, are so great that only God gets the glory. My best preaching, our greatest leadership, is a drop in the bucket about what I think God's going to do. So those to me are very hopeful indicators. Last thing I'll say, I was on a call where they basically did like a little survey of the West, reports from sort of all, sort of major cities around the West. And I'm telling you, this is happening everywhere. Prayer meetings that start for an hour and go for 3 days are happening everywhere. This is, and if you've got eyes to see, you've got to say, this is what God is doing. So the thing I would say is build your capacity, get ready. Azusa Street, 3.5 years of utter glory. That's the greatest revival in church history. The same by 2050, the Pentecostals would catch the Catholics in terms of adherence. That was 3 3-hour meetings a day. Is your church ready to host 3 3-hour meetings a day if God moves in your community?
Right.
Most of what we're praying for will crush us. And so we've got to build our capacity.
So
Get ready. Get ready to be able to pray longer. Build reps in your prayer room. That to me, it's a preparation season more than anything.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Okay. Finally, this. I know people are always saying, "Oh, people don't read anymore." But to him who has ears, people are going to read. If you could recommend 2 or 3 books just off the top of your head for people to get just lit on fire for contending for revival in their generation and their city, what would you recommend?
I think the number one book, you don't even need a second recommendation, okay? In the Day of Thy Power by Arthur Wallace.
Yeah.
That's the book. So he went to the Hebrides Revival and spent time with Duncan Campbell, came back, and then wrote that book out of what he witnessed in the Hebrides.
Yeah.
And I've read, at least dozens of books on revival. And to me, that is a signature volume, which means it's the value of 20 other books in one book.
Yeah.
If you make it through untouched, send me your Amazon receipt and I'll personally give you a refund. You will not. You'll be shaking.
Yeah.
And that to me is the one volume essential reading.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. Yeah, that book's incredible. Jon, thanks so much for being with us. And we're continuing to pray for New York and Kalamazoo and every city, wherever people are, because God wants to do it in big places. He wants to do it in small places. He's just looking for people who want him, because God comes where he's wanted. And I love that line. I've stolen it several times because it's just, it's as simple as it gets, but it's what it's all about. So,
right. Well, great chatting with you, mate. Look forward to catching up soon.
All right. Talk to you. Bye.